sisters, brothers, fathers, mothers, to another one of my special wizard tales.
Hansel and Gretel. Once upon a time there was a young boy, Hansel, who lived with his little sister Gretel and their widowed father Joseph. Their house was not far from the enchanted dark forest, a mysterious place where children were forbidden to go alone. The villagers told legends of the strange creatures who lived there and the people who had disappeared in its gloomy depths. Joseph was a woodcutter, and Hansel and Gretel loved going with him to the village fair each month where he sold his wood.
Come on, old Ziggy. Come on, giddy up. Off we go as fast as we dare to sell our wood at the fair.
They laughed and sang as they trotted along in the cart. While Hansel helped his father to sell their wood, Gretel explored the fair. A one-eyed hunchback with an owl on his shoulder was selling ferrets from the dark forest. Gretel backed away hastily, and the cheeky owl hooted at her. Then she stopped to watch a puppet show about a family of trolls.
Let's be friends,
said the baby troll, waving to the children in the crowd. Wandering further, Gretel spied a plump witch with warts on her nose. Her name was Gwenda the Great Magician, and she was performing magic tricks. Gwenda called Gretel onto the stage to help her, and, with a wave of her wand, turned two startled rabbits into a plate of strawberry jam cakes. Gwenda gave Gretel the cakes to thank her for helping with the trick, and Gretel placed them carefully into her basket for the trip home.
Home we go as fast as we care.
We've sold our wood at the fair.
Sang the little family as they drove home in the cart. On the road ahead, they saw Joseph's friend Otto the blacksmith waving frantically.
The children, Olga and Johann, they've gone missing. And I found Olga's ribbon near the dark forest,
he cried. Hansel was sure that Olga and Johann were safe at the fair, but Otto and Joseph were very worried. They hurried off to look for them, leaving Hansel to take his sister home in the cart.
Oh, Hansel, I hope Olga and Johann are all right,
cried Gretel, sounding a little frightened. Hansel was certain that he had seen his friends at the fair, so he wasn't worried at all. But to cheer his sister up, he suggested that they stop for a picnic.
We can try those strawberry jam cakes,
he said. They chose a peaceful clearing in the trees and sent Ziggy, the horse, off home by himself. The cakes were delicious. They put aside a couple for their father and ate up all the rest. In fact, they ate so many cakes that they began to feel sleepy. First of all, Hansel began to doze off. Then Gretel, too, fell into a deep sleep. Some time later, Gretel was aware of two large rabbits leaning over her. They looked very familiar, and she realized that they were just like the rabbits that Gwenda the Great Magician had turned into strawberry jam cakes.
We're going to help you find those lost friends of yours,
they said, introducing themselves as Smitty and Blackie.
But children are not allowed to go into the dark forest by themselves,
protested Gretel. The rabbits thought for a moment, then made a magic sign. Suddenly, they both had floppy ears and little white tails.
Oh! Hey! We're rabbits!
cried Hansel and Gretel in amazement.
Yeah! And rabbits can go into the dark forest,
said Smitty and Blackie firmly. And so Hansel and Gretel followed the rabbits into the dark forest to find the lost children. Of course, Hansel and Gretel weren't used to hopping instead of walking, and they found it hard to keep up. As they stumbled along, Hansel noticed that Gretel was dropping a trail of crumbs from the cakes that she had saved for their father.
I know, Hansel, in case we get lost. It's a path home,
she explained.
So, where do we find Olga and Johann?
She asked the rabbits. But Smitty and Blackie were frightened now. They had spotted a house some way ahead. The trolls who lived there might know where to find Olga and Johann, but Hansel and Gretel would have to go on alone, as trolls were known to be very fond of rabbit stew. Before they scooted away, the rabbits made the magic sign to turn Hansel and Gretel back into children.
Come on, Gretel. We've come this far. We better keep looking,
sighed Hansel. Looking like children once more, they walked on until they saw the house on the far side of a steep gorge. They crossed a rickety wooden bridge and tiptoed up to peek in the window. Inside, a family of trolls was sitting down to supper. Hansel and Gretel tried to be very quiet, but the trolls had spotted them.
Children?
Catch them!
They snorted. Hansel and Gretel ran for their lives back across the swaying bridge with the trolls close behind.
Faster, Gretel! We'll follow your trail!
Panted Hansel. He led the way as they flew through the forest, but suddenly the trail of crumbs disappeared.
Oh no! The rabbits must have eaten them!
Cried Gretel. She tripped over a log and bumped into Hansel as he stopped to look around for the trail. They both went sprawling to the ground, and the trolls loomed over them, snorting and grunting. As Hansel and Gretel clung to each other, too frightened to speak, the baby troll put out his hand.
Oh, let's be friends.
He said. It was just like the puppet show that Gretel had seen at the fair.
You'd better come with us. It's very bad for children to be all alone in the dark forest,
said the mother troll firmly. She led them back to the house and gave them tea and scones for supper. While they ate, the trolls listened kindly to their troubles.
So, we're looking for our friends, Olga and Johann,
explained Gretel.
And the rabbits told us that you may know where they were,
continued Hansel. The trolls shook their heads. They didn't know about any lost children, but they could take Hansel and Gretel to see Gustav, who was bound to know something.
He's our king! The Grand Troll!
Snorted baby troll. They found King Gustav in his cave nearby. He hadn't heard of any lost children either, but he checked his magical crystal ball.
Ah, look, there. Should have guessed. Rotten Randolph.
He said. The trolls were alarmed.
Oh, Rotten Randolph! Ooh!
Gasped Mother Troll. Rotten Randolph was the biggest, meanest troll of all, and he lived deep in the dark forest with his evil friend, the Bad Ferret. It was darker than dark in that part of the forest at night, so the children would have to stay with them until the morning. As the children lay in bed, trying to sleep, they heard a scary noise. They crept to the window and looked out. A large owl sat on a branch nearby. Gretel recognized him as the cheeky owl that she'd seen with the ferret seller at the fair.
I'm Hoot the Owl. I say, what on earth are you doing in a troll's house?
He asked. Hansel and Gretel explained that they were waiting till morning to rescue their friends who'd been kidnapped by Rotten Randolph.
No time to waste. I'll jolly well take them right away. We'll save them.
Hooted the owl. The children climbed out of the window and followed their new friend into the forest. After some time, Hoot stopped and looked around nervously.
Are you lost, Hoot?
Asked Hansel. Hoot was very embarrassed because owls are supposed to know everything. As he sat wondering which way to go, a large lady owl appeared on the branch beside him.
The only thing you're going to find, young man, is your homework. You're coming home with me, now,
ordered Hoot's mother, and the owls flew off, leaving Hansel and Gretel alone in the forest.
We've been abandoned again. What else can happen now?
Said Gretel. As she spoke, the ground at their feet gave way and they tumbled into a long, dark tunnel. The tunnel ended in a clearing filled with sweetly singing birds and brightly colored butterflies.
Oh, Hansel, it's beautiful. I never thought the dark forest would look so enchanted.
Cried Gretel. But the most amazing sight of all was a house made of sweets and cake with a stream of pure lemonade running past the door. Gretel was thirsty, so she couldn't resist trying some.
It's the best lemonade I've ever tasted.
She gasped.
Come on, Gretel, let's explore!
Shouted Hansel. The bridge across the stream was delicious chocolate. The curtains were made of candy floss, and the front door was golden honeycomb. They ran to and fro, breaking off bits and pieces to try.
Oh, just help yourself to a piece of my door, won't you?
Said a stern voice. Gretel was surprised to see Gwenda, the great magician, the plump witch who had given her cakes at the fair. Hansel and Gretel apologized hastily.
We thought no one lived here. We're looking for our friends, Olga and Johann,
said Gretel. Hansel explained that their friends had been kidnapped by the bad ferret and rotten Randolph and taken deep into the dark forest. Gwenda looked very concerned.
You better come in. I think I just might know where to find them.
She cackled, and she led the children into her kitchen where an enormous pot of soup was bubbling over the fire. The children stared at the enormous soup pot. It was so big that the two of them could easily have fitted inside, while Gwenda opened a trapdoor in the floor. She wanted to show them something that would help them find their friends.
It's down here. Go on, have a look. You'll see exactly what I mean.
She coaxed. As Hansel and Gretel bent over to look, the witch gave them a push and sent them tumbling into the cellar below.
I mean, drop in anytime, won't you, my silly dears?
She cackled as she shut and bolted the trapdoor. Hansel and Gretel were trapped in a deep cellar filled with mountains of sugar that the witch used to make her tempting sweets. In the corner cowered their friends Olga and Johann.
We were walking near the dark forest when Rotten Randolph and the bad ferret captured us and brought us here,
explained Olga. The horrid old witch had been fattening them up by feeding them lots of sugar.
And when we're fat enough, we think she's going to cook us for dinner,
sobbed Olga. Hansel was determined to find a way to escape.
No one's gonna cook us for dinner,
he promised. But things didn't look good. The door to the outside was locked and guarded by Rotten Randolph and the bad ferret. In the kitchen above, Gwenda the witch was putting the finishing touches to the soup she was planning to cook the children in.
Aha! An extra half an hour in the pot and even the skinniest becomes as tender as a spring chicken. Yes! Children, couldn't you just eat them all up? Yes!
She gloated as she added slimy worms and crunchy beetles to the pot. Luckily for the children, Smitty and Blackie, the rabbits who had brought them to the forest, had been following them at a distance to make sure they stayed safe. When they saw what had happened, they ran to fetch Hoot the owl, who was also a friend of theirs.
You gotta come, Hoot! Hansel and Gretel is in terrible trouble! Terrible trouble!
Begged Smitty. Together, they hurried to the house and surveyed the situation. It was obvious that the rabbits would have to tunnel into the cellar to work out the best way to set the children free.
I'm talking about an underground rescue operation, chaps,
said Hoot. Quick as a flash, the rabbits burrowed under the ground. Minutes later, they popped up beside the frightened children, who were very relieved to see them.
Shh! The old bag might hear you. Hoot and us are gonna get you out.
Smitty promised. The rabbits scooted back to where Hoot was waiting and reported that the cellar had a big pile of sugar in the middle.
Pile of sugar? Absolutely jolly perfect. Here's what we're going to do, chaps.
Said Hoot, and he sent them back into the cellar to tell the children his plan. As the witch stirred her soup, ready to add the children, she heard a knock at the door.
Just one final ingredient. What could that be?
She wondered. When she opened the door, Hoot the Owl flew at her, flapping his wings ferociously.
Owl power! Tally-ho!
He screeched. The witch chased him all around the kitchen, but he stayed just out of reach until she overbalanced and fell into the bubbling soup. Down in the cellar, the children made a racket, banging and shouting until Rotten Randolph and the Bad Ferret opened the back door. The mountain of sugar that was piled against it immediately swamped them. Free at last, the children all ran for their lives. The wicked old witch had climbed out of the soup and was chasing them through the forest, getting closer all the time. Gretel tripped over a log and closed her eyes in terror.
Gretel! Gretel! We've been looking everywhere for you,
said her father's voice. Gretel opened her eyes slowly and found she was still in the peaceful clearing where they had fallen asleep after the picnic. Joseph and Otto had found Olga and Johann at the fair. Then they had become worried about Hansel and Gretel when they found Ziggy at home by himself.
I'm sorry, Father. We fell asleep, and I had a terrible dream,
said Gretel sheepishly.
Well, it looks as though we've all found each other again. All's well that ends well, eh?
He said, and took them home for tea.
And thus another fine wizard tale concludes. Sisters, brothers, fathers, mothers, join me again soon for another classic tale. Won't you?